In just 27 explosive seconds, a live congressional hearing turned into national chaos. Millions watched as Jasmine Crockett accused Melania Trump of betraying not only America, but her own husband. The chamber froze, the cameras zoomed in, and the silence cut like a knife. What truth could be so devastating it makes a First Lady's loyalty look like the ultimate betrayal? The red glow of the live banner burned above the chamber like a warning flare across America. Camera flashes cracked like thunder, reporters whispered with clipped urgency, and the audience shifted in restless waves. This wasn't just another hearing. It was a storm waiting to erupt. Jasmine Crockett entered through the tall oak doors, her stride steady, her gaze locked forward. The midnight blue blazer shimmered beneath the blazing lights, a silver pin on her collar catching every camera angle. She didn't pause. She didn't seek approval. She came for one reason only: to confront silence with truth. Across from her, Melania Trump sat at the witness table, immaculate, cold. Her ivory suit glowed beneath the lights, her posture frozen, her face carved from stone. Hands clasped tight, chin tilted upward, she looked less like a witness and more like a statue guarding privilege. The gavel slammed and a suffocating hush swept over the chamber. Millions watched from living rooms, diners, and crowded bars, the sound of clinking glasses replaced by absolute silence. Every eye turned to Jasmine as she leaned forward, her voice sharp as steel. "Mrs. Trump," she began, her tone calm, but heavy. "Loyalty is not silence. Silence is betrayal. And you have betrayed not only America, but your own husband by enabling his lies." A stunned hush ripped through the gallery like a shockwave. The marble walls caught it, magnifying the tremor and sending it surging into homes across the nation. Melania didn't flinch, but her eyes flickered for the briefest moment, like a hairline fracture spreading across stained glass, fragile yet impossible to hide. Producers barked orders into headsets. Journalists scribbled in frenzy, and camera cranes swooped in like vultures hunting for blood. On Twitter, a single phrase shot up the trending list within seconds: betrayal by Melania. America wasn't just watching, it was holding its breath. In a sports bar in Detroit, a veteran slammed his fist on the counter. In a quiet Texas living room, a single mother froze mid-dinner, her fork suspended in midair. Across the country, people whispered the same question: was Jasmine right? Had silence itself become the deadliest crime? And in that charged silence, one question echoed louder than the gavel. When the First Lady refuses to speak, is it loyalty or the most dangerous betrayal of all? The chamber was still buzzing from Jasmine's words when Melania finally leaned toward the microphone. Her voice, soft and deliberate, floated across the silence. "I have always stood by my husband." She spoke like a woman cloaked in dignity, the perfect portrait of loyalty. For a moment, the room seemed to steady. Cameras tightened on her face, capturing the stillness, the composure. She leaned on the image she had crafted for years, the silent wife, unshaken, unbroken, untouchable. But Jasmine didn't blink. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing, and her voice cut through again. Standing by him, or standing in front of the truth, because when power hides its sins, someone always pays the price. A wave of disbelief swept through the gallery once more. Melania's lips pressed into a thin line, but no answer came. Jasmine pressed on, each word sharper, heavier. "Who suffers when corruption is hidden? Who suffers when privilege is protected? It's not you, Mrs. Trump. It's the people outside these walls." In a Detroit sports bar, a veteran shook his head, muttering into his drink. "She's right. We bled for this country while they kept secrets." His buddy stayed silent, eyes glued to the screen, his knuckles white around the glass. In a cramped Texas living room, a single mother froze mid-step, her daughter's homework scattered on the table. She whispered, "That's me. That's who pays." Her eyes welled up, anger mixing with exhaustion, as Jasmine's words poured through the television. And in Florida, a retired steelworker sat alone in his recliner, the glow of the broadcast painting his tired face. He leaned forward, voice cracking. "We trusted them, and they sold us out." Back inside the chamber, Jasmine's voice grew steadier, more relentless. "Mrs. Trump's silence might protect power, but silence cannot protect the powerless. It leaves them stranded, it leaves them broken, and it leaves them betrayed." The camera cut to Melania. Her eyes flickered again, a faint tremor in her hand, as she gripped the edge of the table. She stayed quiet, but the quiet now felt different, less like control, more like a mask beginning to slip. America felt it too. Across kitchens, bars, and crowded trains, viewers leaned closer, hearts pounding. The silence that once looked like loyalty now hung in the chamber, like smoke from a fire choking, unmistakable and inescapable. And Jasmine delivered the final cut, her voice echoing like a hammer. If silence protects power, then tell me who will protect the powerless. The chamber held its breath. Jasmine didn't move at first, her silence stretching like a bowstring pulled to breaking point. Then with deliberate calm, she slid a folder across the polished wood. The camera zoomed in as her hand lingered on the cover. These, she said, her voice sharp, are leaked documents. Financial records that prove Mrs. Trump knew of hidden transfers long before the public ever did. The air cracked open. Reporters jolted upright, scribbling furiously. The gallery gasped in unison, the sound rushing like a wave against marble walls. Melania's face remained frozen, but her knuckles whitened as her grip on the table tightened. On every television across the country, anchors broke in with breathless updates. Banners flashed in red breaking, betrayal files released. Within minutes, the hashtag Betrayal by Melania surged across Twitter, climbing faster than wildfire. In a diner in Ohio, truck drivers sat stunned over half-finished coffee. One slammed his palm on the table. She knew, and she let it happen. His voice carried the outrage of millions who felt the sting of betrayal. Back in the chamber, Jasmine leaned closer, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Mrs. Trump, you weren't silent because you were loyal. You were silent because you were complicit. Melania swallowed hard, her eyes darting for the first time. The mask of control, flawless until now, began to fracture under the relentless gaze of the nation. Every camera captured it. Every viewer felt it. In Los Angeles, a retired teacher clutched the arm of her chair, whispering, "This isn't about marriage. This is about America." In Georgia, a group of young activists erupted in cheers, chanting Jasmine's name at the screen. The country wasn't just watching, they were taking sides. Jasmine raised the final page, holding it high so the cameras could not look away. Your silence did not save him. It condemned all of us. The words landed like a hammer blow. Some in the chamber nodded fiercely, others sat stunned, unable to move. Outside, across the nation, the lines spread like fire, replayed on loop, etched into headlines before the gavel could fall again. The chamber trembled under the weight of the moment. And one chilling question echoed in the air, refusing to be silenced: what happens when the mask of loyalty is torn off live before millions? The chamber hadn't recovered from the first blow when the chairman cleared his throat. He announced a new witness. A former White House aide stepped forward, his hands shaking as he clutched a slim stack of papers. The cameras swiveled like hawks, locking onto him. He raised the documents, his voice trembling but clear. "These are internal emails," he said, "sent directly to Mrs. Trump. They warned of hush money transfers, and her response was simple: for the sake of the family, stay quiet." The chamber exploded in chaos, shouts, the screech of chairs, reporters lunging to record every word, the air thick with shock. Viewers at home felt the punch in their gut. The so-called loyal wife wasn't just silent, she commanded silence. Jasmine rose slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on every step. Her eyes burned as she fixed them on Melania. For the sake of the family, she repeated, her voice steady but rising. Family or country, Mrs. Trump? Which do you betray first? The words hit harder than the gavel. Melania shifted in her chair, her composure cracking for the first time. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the tremor in her lip, the flicker of doubt in her eyes. In a crowded diner in Pennsylvania, a group of retirees shook their heads in disbelief. One woman muttered, "Country comes first, always." In Texas, a young veteran clenched his jaw, whispering to the screen, "She chose power, not us." Back in the chamber, the aide's voice faltered, but the damage was already done. His words replayed in the minds of millions, "Stay quiet." It was more than advice. It was an order, dripping with betrayal. Jasmine stepped closer, her voice ringing out like a verdict. Silence for the family might save your image, but silence against corruption destroys a nation. Every syllable cut sharper, slicing through the chamber's air. The audience leaned in, breathless. Across America, hearts pounded, anger boiling into outrage. It was no longer about documents or emails. It was about trust broken in the open broadcast live to the world. And one haunting question now hung heavy in every living room: when family becomes an excuse, what happens to justice? Across America, screens flickered in bars, classrooms, and living rooms. Every word from the chamber echoed into ordinary lives, stirring memories of sacrifice and loss. People leaned closer, not just watching, but feeling as though Jasmine was speaking for them. In Detroit, a group of union workers crowded around a small television in a break room. Their clothes were stained with grease, their faces weary from long shifts. One man slammed his fist on the table. "That's our fight she's carrying. She's saying what we can't." His co-workers nodded, their eyes fierce with pride. In Ohio, a classroom sat empty after the final bell, but a group of teachers stayed behind. They huddled around a laptop, chalk still on their hands, notebooks scattered. One teacher whispered, "She's defending our kids. She's fighting for a future they keep stealing." Another wiped tears, her voice breaking. "Finally, it's someone sees us." Down in Texas, an immigrant family gathered in a cramped living room. The father worked nights, the mother cleaned houses, their children curled beside them on a torn couch. When Jasmine's words rang out, "Silence destroys a nation," the father whispered. "She speaks for us, for people who don't get heard." His wife nodded, clutching his hand tighter. Montages played across screens. A veteran saluting the television with misty eyes. A grandmother in Florida muttering prayers of thanks. A group of college students in California live streaming their cheers, chanting Jasmine's name as if she were already a legend. Inside the chamber, the contrast was stark. Melania sat frozen in her chair, her silence louder than any word. Outside those marble walls, America was alive, angry, hopeful, united. Jasmine's voice wasn't just a challenge anymore. It was a movement. In kitchens, in diners, in union halls, ordinary mothers and fathers found their voices rising with hers. Their tears carried the weight of betrayal, their anger carried the fire of justice, and their hope clung to the idea that one woman's courage could ripple into every corner of the nation. But the question remained sharp as glass: if America's mothers and fathers could see the truth, why couldn't its First Lady? The weight of America's voices was still echoing when Melania finally spoke. Her tone was calm, almost dismissive, as if brushing dust from a gown. "This is political theater," she said, her eyes sweeping the chamber. "A performance meant to humiliate my family." The words landed cold, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her voice sharp and unshakable. "No, Mrs. Trump, this isn't political theater. This is survival theater for every American who cannot afford your silence." Gasps broke again, but this time they carried fire instead of shock. Reporters typed frantically, their screens glowing, as Jasmine's words exploded across live feeds. Millions at home repeated the line out loud as if it belonged to them. Melania shifted her mask of elegance, slipping ever so slightly. She tightened her jaw, tried to hold her composure, but the chamber had already tilted against her. Jasmine pressed harder, each word heavier than the last. "You call this theater, but out there families are losing homes. Veterans are losing hope. Mothers are losing children, and you sat in silence." The cameras caught every flicker, her eyes narrowing, her hands tightening. The image of untouchable loyalty now looked brittle, human, afraid. In Detroit, union workers replayed the clip on their phones, chanting Jasmine's words in the break room. In Ohio, teachers shared it on social media, typing, "This is not theater. This is survival." In Texas, immigrant families passed it between cousins, whispering, "She fights for us." Melania tried once more, her voice sharper now. "You don't understand what it means to protect a family." But Jasmine struck back without hesitation. "And you don't understand what it means to protect a nation." The chamber shook with applause from the gallery. The chairman banged the gavel for order, but it was useless. The clash was no longer confined to four walls. It was spilling into every screen, every living room, every heart. Melania looked down, her silence suddenly heavier than words. Jasmine stood taller, her presence filling the chamber, her voice carrying like a verdict carved in stone. And as the cameras cut across the nation, one question rose like smoke from a battlefield. What if the theater had already become a war, where truth was the only weapon left? The gavel slammed again, demanding order, but the noise refused to die. The chamber buzzed with tension, words of Jasmine still hanging like smoke in the air. Then the chairman leaned into his microphone, his tone heavy. This committee will now call a surprise witness. The room froze. Reporters stopped mid-sentence, cameras jerked toward the door, and when it opened, the sight made the chamber gasp as one. Trump's former lawyer stepped inside his shoulders, tense, his face pale, clutching a small black case to his chest. Every lens zoomed in, capturing the sweat on his brow, the trembling in his hands. He walked slowly down the aisle, each step echoing like a drumbeat. It felt less like a witness entering and more like an executioner carrying a verdict. He placed the case on the table, his voice breaking as he spoke. "I carry recordings, private conversations, and they prove Mrs. Trump knew far more than she ever admitted." The words cracked through the silence, shattering what little calm remained. Melania stiffened, her hands gripping the table's edge. For the first time, her mask showed real fear, a flicker in her eyes, a tight swallow. The audience leaned forward, hungry for the storm about to break. In homes across America, families gasped along with the chamber. A veteran in Kentucky muttered, "Lord, this changes everything." A mother in Chicago clutched her chest, whispering, She knew all along." Back in the chamber, the lawyer slid a recorder onto the table. Its red light blinked, small and deadly. "On these tapes," he continued, "Mrs. Trump warns aides not to speak. She tells us silence will protect them. She admits the truth cannot be allowed to escape." The gallery erupted. Reporters shouted questions, the sound of clicking cameras filling the air like gunfire. The chairman hammered his gavel, but the room was no longer his to control. Jasmine sat still, her eyes locked on Melania, her face carved in stone. The nation watched two women, one drowning in silence, the other rising in defiance, locked together in a clash bigger than themselves. And as the blinking light burned on the table, a single thought seared through America's mind. What truth could one voice in the shadows bring to light? The lawyer's hand shook as he pressed play. A faint crackle filled the chamber, the kind of sound that makes people hold their breath. Then came the voice, calm, unmistakable, chilling. It was Melania. "If this comes out," she said, every syllable crisp, "America will never forgive us." The chamber erupted. Gasps ricocheted like gunfire. Reporters leapt from their seats. Cameras zoomed so close they caught the twitch in Melania's jaw. For the first time, her silence wasn't a shield, it was evidence. Jasmine's eyes locked on her, sharp and burning. She repeated the words slowly, slicing them open for the world to hear. "Not forgive us. You said us." Her voice carried the fury of millions who felt betrayed. Melania shifted, her lips parting as if to respond, but nothing came out. The room wasn't giving her space. The tape was still playing, her voice weaving the rope of her own undoing. "The family cannot survive another scandal. Stay quiet. Do not speak. Protect him." The words rolled out cold and deliberate like instructions etched in stone. Across America, living rooms exploded with disbelief. In Florida, a retired nurse shouted at her television. She knew she told them to hide it. In Arizona, a young father shook his head, muttering, "She wasn't just silent, she was part of it." Back inside the chamber, Jasmine leaned closer, her tone dripping with controlled rage. "You weren't a bystander, Mrs. Trump. You were a participant. You weren't protecting your husband. You were protecting yourself." The audience was spellbound, torn between outrage and awe. Melania sat frozen, her eyes darting, her mask slipping faster, with every second of her own voice echoing back at her. Reporters hammered keyboards, headlines forming in real time. Melania tapes shocked the nation. Social feeds lit up the phrase, "Never forgive us," trending like a wildfire. Jasmine stood, her figure commanding the room. Her words landed like a verdict no court could ignore. Betrayal has a voice now, and it's yours. The gavel tried to restore order, but it was too late. The sound of betrayal was already alive in every home, every heart. And one question seared into the air. When betrayal has a voice, can silence still hide it? The tape clicked off, leaving a silence thicker than stone. All eyes turned to Melania. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles drained white. The mask of elegance was slipping. She kept her chin high, but the tremor in her jaw betrayed her. The cameras captured every twitch, every blink. America was watching a fortress begin to crumble. Jasmine rose slowly, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "You didn't just betray America," she said, each word heavy. "You betrayed him. You made him believe his lies could survive the light." Melania's lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared ahead, eyes fixed on some invisible point, as if searching for a way out. The chamber leaned in, waiting for a word, a denial, anything, but none came. The chairman asked her to respond. She refused. The gavel struck. Still nothing. Her silence thundered louder than any verdict, echoing through the chamber like an unseen gavel. In living rooms across the country, viewers shifted uncomfortably. A grandmother in Wisconsin whispered, "She's cracking." A young man in New York shook his head, muttering, "She can't hide anymore." The nation wasn't just watching, they were witnessing collapse in real time. Jasmine stepped closer, her presence filling the chamber. Her tone grew colder, harder. "You thought silence would protect him, but silence has destroyed him. And now it's destroying you." Melania's hands shook as she tightened her grip on the table. Her breath grew shallow, her face pale under the relentless glare of the lights. The First Lady, who once seemed untouchable, now looked cornered, exposed human. The gallery buzzed reporters, firing off headlines with frantic speed. Breaking, Melania refuses to answer. Social feeds lit up with one-word collapse. Jasmine didn't relent. Her final words cut through the chaos like a verdict carved into stone. The truth doesn't need your permission to exist. It's already here, and it has broken your silence. The chamber erupted again, gasps, shouts, the thunder of a nation, realizing what they had just seen. And as the cameras lingered on Melania's trembling hands, one question burned into the air. How long can a fortress of silence stand once the cracks show? The morning after America was on fire. News channels blasted the clips on a loop, filling every screen with Melania's trembling silence and Jasmine's piercing words. Anchors spoke with urgency, their voices racing to keep up with the storm. On social media, the recordings spread like wildfire. Hashtags burned through timelines. Betrayal by Melania, never forgive us. Millions shared the footage, each replay more damning than the last. In less than an hour, the nation wasn't just watching, it was dissecting every blink, every tremor. Late-night comedians cracked jokes mocking the phrase, "for the sake of the family." But the newspapers didn't laugh. Their op-eds dripped with rage headlines screaming of betrayal, privilege, and the silence that scarred a nation. In Chicago, a reporter stopped people on the street. A woman shook her head, her voice trembling. "I raised my kids to tell the truth, and she taught hers to hide it." Nearby, a young man crossed his arms, muttering, "It's about time someone called her out." In Oklahoma, an elderly veteran was interviewed outside a diner. His jaw tightened as he said, "We gave everything for this country, and she covered for lies. That's not loyalty. That's treason in silence." The camera caught the tear he quickly wiped away. Others, though, felt relief. A teacher in Pennsylvania admitted, "Finally, it's out in the open. We've all known, but now there's proof." Jasmine gave us proof. Her colleagues nodded, the weight lifting from their shoulders. Across cable networks, panels argued through the night. Former officials defended Melania as a victim, while others called her the silent architect of betrayal. The clash spilled into living rooms, bars, churches, every space turned into a courtroom. And through it all, Jasmine's words replayed like a national anthem. "Your silence did not save him. It condemned all of us." Those lines echoed louder than the gavel, louder than any defense. The nation was no longer an audience. It had become the jury. And one question now loomed over every headline, every screen, every home. What happens when the nation itself becomes the jury? The chamber still buzzed with the echoes of outrage when Jasmine rose to her feet once more. Her eyes scanned the room, her voice steady but burning with conviction. "This isn't about Donald," she said. "This is about truth. And when truth is betrayed, every family in America pays the cost." The words rolled through the air like thunder. They weren't polished sound bites. They were raw, sharp human. The kind of words that crawled under the skin and stayed there, impossible to shake. Veterans in VFW halls across the country straightened in their chairs. One Marine whispered, "She's fighting the battle we never could." His friends nodded, their weathered faces tight with pride. They had carried rifles into foreign lands, but here was Jasmine carrying truth into the heart of power. In church basements, pastors replayed her speech, their congregations murmuring amen after every line. One preacher leaned over the pulpit and said, This woman speaks with the fire of justice. Civil rights leaders clipped her words and blasted them across social media, calling her a torchbearer in a season of shadows. Outside the chamber, the crowd thickened. Protesters held signs, some neatly printed, others hastily scrawled with markers. Justice, truth, silence is betrayal. As Jasmine's words thundered from giant outdoor screens, the chants grew louder, a living chorus pounding against marble walls. And she did not stop. When a first lady chooses silence over justice, she doesn't protect her family. She betrays America's families. She betrays yours and mine. Her voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of millions resting on her shoulders. In a Kentucky diner, a waitress stopped mid-order, her notepad trembling in her hand. Tears welled as she whispered, "She's speaking for me." In California, students huddled around laptops, repeating Jasmine's lines like a battle cry. In New Mexico, an old couple clutched hands, murmuring, "Maybe there's hope after all." Reporters scribbled furiously, but even they couldn't capture it all. This wasn't politics anymore. This was soul against silence. Jasmine wasn't delivering testimony, she was igniting a fire that leapt across living rooms, classrooms, and pulpits. The chamber itself seemed smaller, as if her presence filled every corner. Her words weren't just heard, they were felt. The gavel tried to interrupt, but no sound could compete with the rising roar of truth spilling out of her. And as America leaned in, captivated and trembling, one question rose, louder than any headline: can one woman's courage rewrite the nation's story? The chamber trembled with the echoes of Jasmine's fire. Cameras swung back to Melania, who sat rigid, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were bone white. For the first time, her eyes glistened under the harsh lights. Her voice broke the silence, softer than before, laced with desperation. "I am just a wife," she pleaded, "a wife protecting her family." The words trembled as if she believed them or needed to. For a moment, the gallery hushed. Some felt a sting of pity seeing the First Lady stripped of polish, reduced to a woman clutching the last defense she had left. But pity is fragile, and Jasmine shattered it in a heartbeat. She rose, her tone low but unyielding. "No, Mrs. Trump, you are more than a wife." Her gaze cut through the chamber, every syllable sharp. "You were First Lady, you had power, and you chose betrayal." The words landed heavy. The chamber seemed to inhale all at once. Melania's shoulders stiffened, but she did not speak. She looked smaller now, her ivory suit no longer glowing, but suffocating under the weight of judgment. Outside, Americans leaned forward at their screens. A grandmother in Michigan shook her head, whispering, "We trusted her." In a Texas bar, men who rarely spoke of politics muttered, "She had the power. She chose silence." Melania's lips parted again, searching for words. But all that came was silence. Her mask had cracked too far to mend. The image of loyalty she clung to dissolved under the flood of Jasmine's truth. Jasmine's voice rose once more, steady as a gavel. "You could have stood with the people. You could have spoken for justice. Instead, you chose to protect lies. That is not loyalty. That is betrayal in its purest form." The crowd in the gallery erupted, some shouting approval, others stunned into silence. The chairman hammered his gavel, but the sound drowned beneath the roar of voices echoing through marble halls. Melania lowered her eyes, unable to meet Jasmine's gaze. The once untouchable figure now looked cornered, judge defeated, not by scandal, but by the truth she refused to speak. And as the cameras carried the image into millions of homes, one question burned like fire: is ignorance ever an excuse when power is at stake? The chamber finally quieted, the roar of moments past, dissolving into an eerie stillness. Every gaze locked on Jasmine as she rose one last time. Her posture was unshaken, her eyes burning with purpose. She didn't glance at Melania. Instead, she fixed her gaze on the cameras, knowing millions were watching, waiting, needing something to hold on to. "Silence in the face of corruption," she said, her voice slow, deliberate, "is not loyalty. It is betrayal." The words thundered across the marble walls and out into living rooms, bars, churches, and schools. Reporters froze mid-sentence, pens dangling in the air. Producers stopped whispering. Across the country, viewers leaned closer to their screens, struck still by the gravity of what they were hearing. Her tone deepened, carrying sorrow and fury in equal measure. When lies are hidden, it is families who bleed. When truth is silenced, it is children who suffer. And when those in power protect only themselves, it is the people who pay the cost. Each sentence landed like a hammer, ringing across the nation. In an Ohio diner, a waitress clutched her apron, whispering the words back as if in prayer. In Georgia, a church congregation stood as one repeating, "It is betrayal." In New York, veterans at a VFW hall rose to their feet and saluted the television, their faces streaked with tears. Jasmine pressed on her cadence, rising like a tide. This moment is not about one man. It is not about one family. It is about who we are as a nation. Will we surrender to silence, or will we stand for truth? The chamber was silent, the weight of history pressing on every corner. Melania sat still, her eyes cast downward, a figure drowning in judgment. Jasmine's closing words fell like stone into water rippling outward. If we allow silence to rule, we lose everything. But if we speak, if we fight, if we choose courage over comfort, then America still has a chance to be what it promised. Her final whisper cut through the stillness, carried on every microphone, every screen. If betrayal is silence, then what is the sound of justice? Across the country, America became a mirror. Diners buzzed with debate, church pews shook with whispered prayers, and veterans' halls echoed with voices that hadn't spoken this loud in years. Jasmine's words were no longer just a speech in Congress. They were a spark lighting fires in ordinary lives. In a small-town diner in Iowa, farmers argued over coffee mugs and bacon grease. One old man slammed his fist saying, "She's right. Silence is betrayal." A younger waitress shook her head, muttering, "It's all politics." The clash of generations hung heavy in the room, proof that truth cuts differently depending on where you stand. In Atlanta, a church choir replayed Jasmine's lines on a projector. Their pastor raised his hands and said, "This is a call for justice, not vengeance." The congregation stood murmuring amen together, their voices blending into one rising chord. At a veterans' hall in Pennsylvania, men with worn jackets and medals on their chests leaned forward. One Marine whispered, "She spoke for us." Another added, "We fought wars for less than this." Their silence afterward was thicker than any battlefield fog, but it wasn't only the older generation. On TikTok and Instagram, Jasmine's words cut into 15-second clips, spreading faster than wildfire. College students mimicked her tone, repeating the line, "Silence is betrayal." Teenagers stitched the footage into protest videos, overlaying it with music and bold captions. The truth had gone viral. In living rooms, families sat together, grandparents and grandchildren watching the same clip but feeling it in different ways. The elders nodded solemnly, remembering old betrayals. The young scrolled, sharing Jasmine's fire with the swipe of a finger. Two worlds, one message. The divide was real, but so was the connection. Jasmine's voice bridged generations, uniting them not in agreement, but in recognition. Something undeniable had been spoken, and it refused to be silenced. And as her words echoed in diners, churches, classrooms, and screens, one question pulsed louder than politics itself. When truth echoes in every corner, can lies ever survive? The chamber was empty now. The noise, the cameras, the chaos, all gone. Jasmine sat alone at the long wooden table, the glow of a single lamp casting shadows across her face. Her hands rested flat, her shoulders finally lowering after hours of fire. She closed her eyes, whispered into the silence. Justice isn't about winning. It's about remembering who we serve. The words were meant for no one, yet they carried the weight of millions. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Crowds gathered on the Capitol steps, their chants echoing against the stone. Some held banners high. Others lit candles that flickered in the cold night, tiny flames of defiance against the dark. Across America, the montage unfolded. In Detroit, families hugged in crowded kitchens, holding one another tighter than before. In Texas, immigrants marched down narrow streets, their children riding on shoulders, waving signs painted in bold colors. In California, college students circled campus lawns, candles in hand, their voices rising together. Veterans stood at vigils, medals pinned to jackets that had seen war. Mothers clutched their children, close, tears streaming down faces lit by candlelight. Strangers embraced in the streets, bound not by politics, but by a shared hunger for truth. Jasmine's words replayed on screens projected onto walls, whispered in prayers. Silence is betrayal. The line no longer belonged to her, it belonged to the people. And slowly a new line began to spread alongside it. Courage is contagious. From pulpits, from classrooms, from protest lines, it leapt from voice to voice. One act of defiance had become a chorus. Back inside, Jasmine rose and walked out into the night. The chants grew louder as she stepped into the crowd, her figure swallowed by thousands carrying the fire she had sparked. She no longer stood alone. The story closed not in silence, but in choice. Silence is betrayal. Courage is contagious. Which will we choose? And as the screen faded, one final question cut through the darkness, daring every viewer to answer. If you believe truth must be louder than silence, what would you say today? The truth becomes undeniable. Silence in the face of lies protects no one. It only deepens the wound of a nation. Having the courage to speak even when power looms large is the only way to preserve trust and justice. If the truth stood before you today, would you let it pass in silence or raise your voice to keep it alive? If this story moved, you don't let it fade into silence. Like, share, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where truth is louder than power and every voice matters. Hit the bell because the next story may not only expose the lies, it may remind us who we really are. What part of Jasmine's fight spoke to you most? Leave a comment. Let's raise our voices together, not let them be buried in silence. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching.